Hello. Israel and the Iranian-backed militant group Hezbollah have agreed to a ceasefire. That's after a flare-up of fighting in southern Lebanon. An Israeli military spokesman said the ceasefire is now in place, but the army would resume hostilities if called upon. Well, we now know at least 47 people have been killed and more than 100 wounded in the latest round of Israeli action in southern Lebanon. That's according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. And those Israeli attacks came after 4 Israeli soldiers were killed in the area. Israel says it hit some 80 Hezbollah targets throughout southern Lebanon overnight and into the morning. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has said his troops will stay in Lebanon, quote, as long as necessary. Well, our correspondent, Karine Torbay, is in Tyre in southern Lebanon. She sent this report before that ceasefire was announced.
This is pretty much how many neighborhoods in Tyre look today. Massive destruction. Of course, Tyre is a city in South Lebanon. Not just any city, it's one of the oldest in the world, but it's also one that is very famous for its beach, for its cafes, restaurants, hotels, for its old town, and of course, for its ruins, Roman ruins, because this city is a very rich one in culture and in history. In normal times, around 60,000 people live in what is usually a very vibrant city, Tyre. But recently, most of them had to flee it for fear of being killed by Israeli strikes. Israel says it is actually targeting Hezbollah's infrastructure, but it has issued a blanket evacuation order, which led most of the residents of this city to leave it. 2 days ago, some of them returned to check on their properties, on their houses, on their neighborhoods. And just today, some of them had to flee again, to be displaced one more time following the Israeli attacks.
Well, we can go to Jerusalem live now, speak to our correspondent there, Charlotte Gallagher, who joins me. Charlotte, to what extent are the Israelis, by agreeing to this ceasefire with Hezbollah, do you think it's because they've been under pressure from the United States, because they want their deal with Iran not to fall apart, and the all of it is connected, of course, isn't it? And J.D. Vance was saying, that the US Vice President, that Israel needs to start listening to its only remaining ally, i.e. the United States.
I mean, I think that's absolutely correct, Ben. I mean, essentially, Israel got a bit of a public telling off by J.D. Vance yesterday, saying, remember that the defensive weapons that you're using in Israel, a lot of them were made in America and they were bought with American taxpayers' money. And as you said, he was saying, you need to remember that we are your biggest friend, we're your most important friend. You need to wake up and smell reality. So I think Benjamin Netanyahu has been under a huge amount of pressure from the United States. Donald Trump earlier this week said he could get a little bit excited, Benjamin Netanyahu, talking about those strikes on Beirut over the weekend. But he said you don't need to blow up a whole building if you're just looking for one Hezbollah fighter. So undoubtedly, Benjamin Netanyahu under a lot of pressure from the US to stop fighting in southern Lebanon. However, there's also internal pressure on him. A lot of people inside Israel want the offensive push to continue, particularly far-right politicians like Ben Gvir. Today he said all of Lebanon should burn. That was after those clashes overnight. Other politicians have said similar things, saying they want the fighting to continue, perhaps in not that kind of language, though. And as well, the war in southern Lebanon has been incredibly popular with the Israeli public, who see Hezbollah as this existential threat and believe Israel will not be safe as long as Hezbollah is operating inside Lebanon. A few minutes ago, we heard from Lebanese state media. They say there have been some airstrikes since that 4 p.m. ceasefire deadline. And we've also heard from the ambulance service that's looking after the Nabatea area in southern Lebanon. And they say there has been 7 airstrikes in Lebanon since that ceasefire began. So we're still building up a picture of what exactly is going on in southern Lebanon. But political pressure definitely on Benjamin Netanyahu right now, especially as he looks towards the general election, Ben.
All right, Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. Well, as Charlotte was just saying, that ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah has, it seems, been brokered by the United States. And last night, as Charlotte was saying, we heard from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who was lambasting critics in Israel of the American deal with Iran, which includes an end to hostilities in Lebanon.
Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And he happens to be the head of state of the world superpower. If I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world.
J.D. Vance there. Let's head to Washington and speak to our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman. Well, it was pretty blunt language there from J.D. Vance, wasn't it? And do you think to an extent Israel seems to have got the message by agreeing to this ceasefire with Hezbollah?
Not really, because remember J.D. Vance was saying that yesterday, and it is since then that we saw this deadly escalation in Lebanon. Now, we're obviously reporting what the White House, a senior US official, is saying, that they understand there is a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. It seems that, definitely the IDF have said that there is a ceasefire in place. Hezbollah sources seem to be suggesting there's a ceasefire too, although this is heavily caveated by saying so long as the other side doesn't do anything. Although on the ground it seems like already there are reports of further airstrikes in and around Nabatea in southern Lebanon since 4 p.m. local time, since the ceasefire was supposed to come into effect. So I would say, Ben, that all of these repeated announcements of ceasefires are becoming increasingly meaningless because they're just not holding. And the question, I think it's almost inevitable that this one will not hold. The only question is how long it doesn't hold for. It seems like it's potentially not holding already. The reason that these ceasefires get announced, and these are not in the traditional sense with maps and with ways of monitoring violations of ceasefires, these are just sort of simply announcements. And I think they largely take place to keep Donald Trump happy to a certain extent, to try and keep Tehran on board with the process, with both sides now accusing the other of being unable to rein in its hardliners, its proxy groups and its allied states in terms of the fighting in Lebanon. And that is why what is happening in southern Lebanon has the capacity to completely derail this US-Iran deal, the memorandum of understanding that Donald Trump desperately needs now. And the fact that, it has that capacity, continues to do so, is why Mr. Trump and J.D. Vance have been getting visibly, increasingly frustrated and angry with the Israelis, because, Mr. Trump has been suggesting that the Israelis can't contain themselves and have been, in effect, senselessly killing civilians in their fight against Hezbollah. He's been saying that in a really unprecedented way. I think the Israelis are certainly, those far-right ultra-nationalists, very unhappy with that. And you're seeing now more pressure from that contingent in Israel, saying things like all of Lebanon must burn, in response to the fact that 4 Israeli soldiers were killed as part of this fighting. And it looks like a very high death toll on the Lebanese side. We heard 18 earlier. That looks like now it might be up closer to 50. So this is a really serious escalation overnight. It's going to be almost impossible to contain, I think.
OK, Tom Bateman, thank you very much indeed. We're just hearing, in fact, that the ambulance service in Lebanon now says there have been 7 strikes, 7 attacks in southern Lebanon since that ceasefire was announced between Israel and Hezbollah, just illustrating, underlining, I suppose, how shaky that ceasefire is, to say the least. Let's talk to our World News correspondent, Joe Inwood, who's with me in the studio. And as Tom was saying there, the whole situation in southern Lebanon is so crucial to the wider peace plan between Iran and the United States, which is in its infancy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was one of the key discussions, the key points the Iranians said, and frankly, everyone else seemed to agree with, apart from the Israelis, is that Lebanon was included in the Memorandum of Understanding, the big deal that is, well, actually hasn't really been done, but they're trying to do. That would cover Lebanon as well. And so the Israelis, essentially, by having the capacity to continue fighting in Lebanon, they have the capacity basically to torpedo any deal. They have a kind of de facto veto over any deal being done, because all they need to do is to continue the fighting. And so that's why that's why the opposition that we've seen within Israel to the memorandum of understanding is so important, because what they can do, and there clearly are provocations coming from Hezbollah. This isn't just one way, but it allows them to continue responding to Hezbollah, to continue the fighting, and as you say, potentially undermine any deal.
Yeah, and in Israel, let's be clear, there is very little enthusiasm for this deal between the US and Iran. I mean, they think it's good for Iran and bad for Israel, so they don't have a huge interest in seeing this peace deal stick.
Let's be entirely frank about it. The US and Israel have not achieved, as whatever Donald Trump says, they've not achieved all of their strategic goals they set out. At the start of this war, it was stop Iran never having any nuclear weapon, degrade their military capabilities of their missile programs, get rid of their navy and air force and other things, which they have done that to an extent, and destroy their ballistic missile program. Most of that has not been done. Most of that is not included in the Memorandum of Understanding. And the Israelis basically feel, and some on the right of President Trump's party, feel that he's basically lost his nerve and should carry on pushing, because they think the job has been left half done. President Trump is thinking, actually, that I don't know if he's thinking we failed, but there are more and more people thinking this was a strategic error, let's just get out of this. And so that is the kind of the divergence of positions between the Israelis and the Americans. Donald Trump wants to see the Strait of Hormuz opened. He wants to see gas prices come down in the US. He wants to see him stop getting the blame for what's going on. The Israelis think we've got other priorities, and that's why we're now seeing this divergence between these two allies.
All right, thank you so much, Joe Inwood, reporting there. We can speak now to the former senior policy advisor to the US State Department, Israeli-Palestinian negotiating team, Laura Blumenfield. Laura, thank you very much for being with us. I mean, is this going to be a problem all the way through for this US-Iran peace plan? The situation in southern Lebanon between Israel and Hezbollah is so volatile, so changeable from one day to the next.
Yes, I think we're looking at a smoking hot ceasefire summer. It's going to be on again, off again. I think one important point to mention is that Iran is really testing the limits of their win. They see this war, they're coming out of it as victors, and they're flexing their muscles and their reach across the Middle East. Hezbollah is their key ally and proxy, and they want to show that they call the shots. Although Donald Trump says he calls the shots, Hezbollah is firing them, and Israel is falling right into that trap. And yes, it's creating friction between the United States and Israel. I'm sure that back in Iran, if they're watching this program, they're eating their popcorn and enjoying the show. I mean, there's been friction between the United States and Israel in the past. When I was at the State Department under Secretary Kerry, trying to broker peace between Israelis and Palestinians, there were many days that we were bickering with the Israelis more than actual brokering peace. But there is something new, and for those who care about the Israel-U.S. alliance, something really chilling, and I would say that's in tone. We heard it from J.D. Vance last night. There was a coldness to it. It isn't that kind of hot, combustible dynamic that you have between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, where 1 minute Trump is calling him a model ally, and the next he's just blowing him up and saying that, with F words, that Netanyahu is effing. Yeah.
Crazy, I think, was the terminology, yes. Wasn't it? Yeah. What do you think of we've had this memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States, and it's supposed to lead to a 60-day negotiation, which hasn't really got off the ground because those talks in Switzerland have been postponed now because of that fighting in Lebanon. But what do you think of the deal that has been agreed so far between the US and Iran?
Well, Trump has his deal, and he put it sort of almost in sign language when he said, gas prices are going down and the stock market is going up. He is a real estate magnate. He's acquisitional. The diplomats may not be flowing, but the oil is flowing through the Gulf. He loves gold. Oil is liquid gold. So I think if we can kind of keep this a ceasefire, a stalemate, get to the midterms for him, and there's no political repercussions from what he called, an excursion. I don't see this, as a huge disaster for him personally, the way that he internalizes and see it. He says that this war is in the rear view mirror. Netanyahu, as they say, where you stand is where you sit. He can't escape the geography of Hezbollah sitting just to the north. Before October 7th, when I spoke to Israeli defense officials, they would say to me that the existential threat that kept them up at 3 a.m. was Hezbollah. It never occurred to them that there'd be a threat from Hamas, and Iran just felt too far away to be worrying about every day.
Yeah. I mean, do you think the president, in a sense, in a nutshell, has found this war easier to start than it is to finish?
Well, he's finished. I mean, the rest of the world is having trouble with it. And that's why he calls Hezbollah and Lebanon a kind of small war, right? There's no wealth, there's no oil. He is focused on the gold. He promised his voters a golden era. So as far as he's concerned, he's skipping on to the next event. I would worry about Cuba, frankly. He comes from the New York State real estate world. It's own or be owned. So what can he own next? As he said recently in an interview, there's no limits to my power. His power is money. Netanyahu's is muscle. And that's the problem that we're seeing today.
All right, Laura, thank you so much, as ever. Very good to talk to you and have you on BBC News. Just one quick update on that Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire. We're now hearing from the Lebanese ambulance service. They're actually saying there have been 12 airstrikes, 12 attacks on southern Lebanon since that supposed ceasefire came into force. So clearly not very effective at the moment.